If you're just tuning in, welcome. I am Assemblymember Radnice Bichard-Hermlin, Chair of the Brooklyn Democratic Party. The Kings County Democratic County Committee represents over 1.1 million registered Democrats, making us one of the largest county parties in the nation. I'm also honored to serve as the first Black woman to lead a county party in New York City. It is a sign of our party's progress that we are all here today. I want to thank once again the people who made this debate possible, our debate committee, district leaders, and political clubs. I also want to acknowledge our moderator this evening, Brooklyn's very own Errol Lewis. Errol is a CNN political commentator and the host of New York One's Inside City Hall, a nightly political show on Spectrum News. We are honored to have him as the moderator for this evening's debate. Now, we will hear from the candidates about a role that needs no further introduction, the New York City mayor. I'd like to welcome Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, Shaun Donovan, Ray McGuire, New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer, Maya Wiley, Andrew Yang, Laurie Sutton, and Kathryn Garcia. This is a pivotal race that will largely decide the city's continued recovery from the pandemic and fiscal crisis. We're facing unprecedented times, and one of these candidates will help us heal and hopefully emerge stronger than ever. I'm as excited as you are to hear about the city's next great mayor's plan. Let's dive in. Now back to you, Errol.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome to the last of tonight's Kings County Democratic debates. I'm Errol Lewis, the political anchor at Spectrum News New York One. More importantly, I am a registered Democrat and longtime resident here in Crown Heights, and I'll be moderating this discussion. We're going to talk for about an hour and also debate among the leading candidates for mayor. I am well aware and appreciative that you all have been doing lots and lots of forums, including one that immediately preceded this one, on the topic of education. In deference to the folks who did that, I'm going to not ask education questions because I know we'll be able to get your lively discussion from a different source. As we all know, the incumbent mayor, Bill de Blasio of Park Slope, is term limited, will not be seeking re-election. So tonight we're going to hear from the leading candidates seeking that office. The rules for our discussion are as follows. We're not going to have opening statements. Candidates will generally have 45 seconds to respond to my questions. There may be follow-up questions for clarity. Rebuttals to question are limited to 30 seconds, and we can continue that if the discussion gets lively and is clarifying issues. We are going to have a cross-examination round in which each candidate will be allowed to ask one question to one of his or her rivals and get a 1-minute response, just question and answer. All candidates are going to be expected to weigh in on each major subject area. Our goal is a substantive discussion of how these candidates intend to tackle important issues facing New York. So candidates, welcome. Good to see all of you. I want to ask you about the pandemic. The next mayor is going to pick up wherever we happen to be on January 1st of next year. Which part of the current recovery plan, and I'm talking about the health side of it, the vaccination plan, which part of the current vaccination plan most needs improvement? And what would you do differently if you were mayor right now? Let's start with you, Mr. Adams.
Thank you, Errol. The entire process has been an embarrassment and is the highest level of dysfunctionality that I've ever witnessed in my life. And it's not as though we did not know. And I communicated with City Hall that the most important aspect of this is a real-time process. Everyone that was given the vaccine should have had a handheld device, put in the ethnicity, the zip code, and the gender of the individuals receiving the vaccine. This way we could have looked at in real time to correct any mistakes we've had. Finding out that Black and brown people were not given that vaccine is an embarrassment and it is an insult to this entire city.
Mr. Donovan.
Thanks, Errol. Great to see you. Look, my 80-year-old mother-in-law who has a lung condition had her vaccine appointment canceled last week. This is personal to me. And we need to do three things. First of all, we need a mayor who can actually get the help that we need from Washington, D.C. to increase the number of vaccines coming here. I worked side by side with Dr. Fauci on Ebola, on Zika, when I was in President Obama's cabinet. I can bring the help we need from DC. Second, we need a mayor who actually understands how to build the health infrastructure and outreach in communities, particularly Black and brown communities around Brooklyn and around this city, to ensure that we have vaccination sites and the opportunity for everyone to be vaccinated in this city. And then third, we need to make sure we have a mayor who understands how to manage large, complex problems. I oversaw the $4 trillion budget. I oversaw a $50 billion budget at HUD, and have been engaged again and again in crisis management, from Sandy to so many others. I have the leadership and experience that could end this pandemic in New York.
Okay. Ms. Garcia, who is not dealing with a snowstorm tonight.
But, you know, I feel at a loss to not be able to track trucks all evening and all tomorrow and get up and talk to you at 5 a.m. It's a loss to me. But I put out a vax plan that is clear that we did not define the problem correctly. The problems that have been, we want to vaccinate our most vulnerable. What are the challenges that they have to getting an appointment? Oh, language, technology, disability. We needed to bring vaccines to this population via mobile trucks. I've set those types of systems up, and we needed to lean on our nonprofit sector, who are key trusted stakeholders. They know these people. They could have been setting up pre-appointments before the vaccine ever even got here, and we would be making great strides on ensuring that our most vulnerable people, the people who got hit hardest by COVID, were being served now. At this point in time, it's like trying to get a concert ticket for, you know, a rock concert. If you can stay on the line long enough, you'll eventually get through. But many people can't do that, and we should have facilitated it. I know how to set up those systems. I've done it. I've done it with food. I've done it with sanitation. I've done it with DEP.
Okay. Mr. McGuire, what has gone wrong and what would you be doing differently?
Grossly ineptly managed. It's all been poorly managed, starting from the federal government when we first had this. Today, we have a situation where, of the people who have reported their race, 300,000 or so, 48% of people who received the vaccine are white, 11% are Black. What this has identified is the systemic equities that I've talked about before. We have healthcare deserts. We know where the issues are for the most, who have been most disproportionately impacted. We failed miserably, starting from the federal government, to identify and now disseminate the vaccine to those who are most at risk. I would have changed, and I would have planned to make sure that we address the healthcare deserts first, the most vulnerable first. I would completely plan for this and made sure that we would never, ever encounter anything like this before. And I managed through crisis, so I know how to get this done.
Okay. Mr. Stringer.
Look, I'm running for mayor because we just got to manage the hell out of this city. And proof point is this vaccination plan by the city is an absolute failure. Today, I joined with Jumaane Williams to again implore the mayor to take action to fix these 3 websites that younger people can't access for their parents. You know, imagine Shaun not being able to answer 51 questions on a website just to help his parents. That's not right. And second, we've called for more data because we wanted to make good strategic decisions. And what we saw today was not just data that showed real discrimination in the vaccine program, but no real plan to redirect resources in different languages and different strategies to make sure that everyone who is eligible for a vaccine can get it. And this is the continuing failure of a city hall that has failed to manage over the last 7 years. But this now is life or death. Look, we really didn't know that this virus was here, but we knew when the virus hit that a vaccine really was on the way. Any medical journal would have informed City Hall that it was coming, and it certainly was here by November. And the fact that we have not been able to manage a 2-car funeral to get this done has to change. And part of the way we do that is by fixing the things in front of us. I've outlined a comprehensive plan on how to get the vaccine moving. The mayor has adopted some of my ideas, 24/7 vaccination sites, because I do believe the Biden administration will eventually move vaccines into the city, but we have to be ready for the capacity because we're not going to open up this city's economy unless we inoculate, and we inoculate in a fair and just way.
Okay, Ms. Sutton.
Yes, hi, Errol. So listen, here we go again. We got exactly the results that one would predict when there is no planning, no coordination. The mayor and the governor, as usual, were jockeying back and forth as the first vaccines came out. And this is, as has been said, a life and death issue. So, if we could deliver 6 million vaccines for smallpox in 1947 in 2 to 3 weeks, what we're missing here is not the resources, it's not even perhaps the intention, but certainly it's the leadership, it's the managerial and operational competency, it's the ability to execute on the ground and adapt to shifting conditions, and it's the character and competence to lead during life and death.
Okay, Ms. Wiley.
Rana Mungan, Black woman, 30 years old, public school teacher, East New York. And she's dead from COVID because she tried 2 times before she was finally allowed to get a COVID test. This is not a problem that should surprise us because it really is about our failure over and over and over again to recognize that it is communities of color, Black, Latino, Asian, that are always hit first, always hit hardest in every single disaster, and yet we never prepare in advance. And I, as a racial justice advocate, actually worked on suing to keep maternal and childcare beds in Harlem and lobbying on civil rights provisions for healthcare reform during the Clinton years. I can tell you that one of the things we had to do was say in advance, recognizing we had already botched it with testing, recognized that this administration already made a major mistake when it took contact tracing out of the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, that we needed to re-engage on a vaccine distribution plan that understood it was communities of color that were hit first, that were hit hardest, that had the highest numbers of people who were vulnerable, and with whom we had to listen and learn and lead in partnership with what would be the best vaccine distribution strategies so we could just end the disparities and ensure that all our vulnerable people got the vaccines they deserve.
Okay, Mr. Yang.
Errol, you look so good in casual. There's something about, like, I gotta say, it's a great look. You should bring it to TV. So this rollout has been incredibly frustrating for so many. And there were 3 sites in Brooklyn that had this scenario play out over this weekend, which is you had dozens of workers, you had hundreds of vaccines or doses, and then you didn't have the patients. And where there was one doctor who reported vaccinating 3 patients all day when they vaccinated 70 on an earlier occasion. And making matters worse, they were told that they could not reach out to patients to actually fill that capacity for the day. This is just a failure of bureaucracy and leadership at an unconscionable level. Because at this point, any delay in vaccine rollout is costing us lives and costing us a chance at a genuine recovery. My job as your mayor will be to accelerate our recovery as quickly as possible and do it in an equitable way. If we all know that people of color are not going to get vaccinated at the same levels if you have a level playing field because they have lower access technology, lower levels of resources, less time. So what you want to do is you want to actually bring it to them in Brownsville and say, look, we're going to change the age eligibility in this community to try and equalize it. And then you need a way to quickly verify that you've been vaccinated on your smartphone so that we can reopen schools, we can reopen our places of business, we can reopen the city for the 60 million missing tourists who supported over 300,000 jobs in our city. This is mission critical, and a failure on this level that's costing us lives is completely unconscionable.
Okay, thank you, candidates. I want to start but we can take maybe about 10 minutes to have a discussion about public safety. And I want to start with you, Mr. Adams. You made a proposal that was adopted wholesale by the current mayor to have community precinct councils contribute to the process of selecting and evaluating precinct commanders. As you know, my dad actually had that job for a number of years as well in Brooklyn. The flip side of having community input in who runs the local precinct is the potential for corruption. And we've seen a lot of that even without input from precinct councils. How would you guard against that?
Okay, and Errol, may I have a point of clarity?
Yes.
Because I believe at the start of the forum, you stated 45 seconds for answers. I'm on my forums with my colleagues, and it seemed like I'm the only one that's respecting the time limits. If 45 seconds is a creative 45 seconds, let me know, and then I'll be creative, and I'll get my point longer.
Well, I'll tell you, the true answer, of course, and you all have worked with me enough to know, these are guidelines that are intended to facilitate a conversation. So okay. I'm not gonna cut people off at 61 seconds. We want to make sure we get our ideas out.
Okay, I just get cut off a lot, so I just want to get some clarity on the rules of the game.
Understood.
Okay, so thank you for your question, and I want to be clear. The mayor's plan did not go far enough, and I believe that we should put together a panel made up of community board members, precinct council, civic, youth organizations and group to sit down, interview the precinct commanders, so the precinct commanders will come up with their full position on how they're going to fight crime, how they're going to deal with the issues in the community and enforcement in the community. In addition to that, we could use the new law 50A to look at the background of the precinct commander so we'll know who this person is. Is he a good fit for the community? And it is the job of the DOI, IAB, and other agencies to deal with corruption. We can't let the fear of corruption get in the way of having real community input and dealing with choosing a powerful position as a precinct commander.
Okay, I mean the concern and the reason I raise it, Maya Wiley, is that we know there is, and you know this as a former chair of the Civilian Complaint Review Board, there are bad actors out there on both sides of the badge. The fear I would have is, what if a faction fight is lost by a group, and then or the winners of a faction fight that names the next precinct commander, all of a sudden they're getting extra placards. All of a sudden they get an early phone call if their kid is in a bar fight. All of a sudden we've opened the door for all kinds of misconduct that we'd have to be concerned about. What do you think of that?
I think that's exactly some of what we have to be concerned about. We do have to put the public back in public safety. And I think this is a discussion that acknowledges that communities have to be an active and engaged voice and partner in doing that. And what I mean by that is the policies and the priorities of policing, what police should be doing and what they should not be doing, like mental health distress calls. And that we should be making sure that the rules of the road, the patrol guide, are bright and clear and do not allow so much gray that police officers get off when there's been misconduct, and that we should have public engagement, active and aggressive in what those priorities and what those rules of the road are. But it does take a strong mayor willing to stand up to police unions, as well as willing to engage with communities and ensuring true civilian oversight on what police are doing, how, why, and what they're not doing, and hold them accountable.
Okay, Ms. Sutton, let's pick up on that thought that Eric Adams put out there. We want to get more public involvement, but we have to do it the right way. What, in your opinion, would be the right way to do that?
Absolutely. I think that, yes, it's important to put the public in public safety, but it's also equally important to put the safety back in public safety. Right now, the public is scared. 70% of New Yorkers are afraid if they come back to work that they're going to be subject to the kinds of headlines and violent crimes that we've seen repeatedly over these last several months. I do absolutely, in my public safety plan, I propose standing up a public safety coordination council, which brings in not only NYPD, but 7 other agencies of city government, including myself, run by the mayor, bringing in also on a quarterly basis members of the public, civic stakeholders, advocates, so that we can have really transparent ownership of public safety and sharing of its both blessings and burdens.
Yeah, and Kathryn, Garcia, I mean, interagency discussion raises, of course, the point that public safety is not just the NYPD, right? There's probation, there's correction, there's a lot of other stuff going on. How do we do a better job of both making full use of all of those institutions as well as bringing the public into the direction of public safety?
This is an incredibly important conversation that we're having, but it's also about management. It's about management of a uniformed agency and ensuring that they are doing what they are supposed to do at the direction of the mayor and ensuring that the community is part of that conversation. But I'll tell you right now that I had community board members come to me because they liked their district superintendent at sanitation and they didn't want me to move him. But that has to occur. You have to have managerial flexibility in order to actually be equal across the city and ensure that we are giving equal services. And nobody has done that and managed a uniform force of 10,000 to get that done. But I would ensure that we are clear about what the rules of the road are. I agree with Maya. You have to know what you are allowed to do and what you are not allowed to do and what we want you to confront and what we don't want you to confront. But I have to tell you that in dealing with pop-ups of homeless encampments, with homeless services, with sanitation, and with PD was very successful. And having City Hall coordinate that was very important to our success. It is what often we don't do well. And I would say another piece that was very successful was the MAP program, where the mayor's office brought together all of those agencies.
Right. Let me go to you, Ray McGuire. We've had two very big conversations in this city in 2020 about public safety. We had many demonstrations over the need for more accountability, but we've also seen a doubling of shootings and an upsurge in crime. If you get sworn in next January 1st, how will you handle that?
First of all, let me say I would make certain that the system that I have is not a one where we'd have to police the police nor manage through factions. This comes with leadership and it comes with management. How would I handle this? I would make certain that the culture that is important in the NYPD is a culture that reflected my values. It's got to be a culture of respect, accountability, and proportionality. There's no trust. There's no respect between the police and the community. We need to restore that by putting police and people who can represent the greatest needs in the community, like mental health care professionals. We need to make sure that we restore that. Restore community policing. Make sure that we have venues, places where the police and the community can convene. So we begin to establish that relationship. Accountability. We pay $200 million a year for those who are serial misbehaviors. The community doesn't trust that a police person who has misbehaved is going to be held accountable. We need to have visible accountability. And the last thing is proportionality. It's been said, if the only thing that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When it comes to Black and brown communities, it's a sledgehammer. And so I would restore and instill a culture of what I call RAP, respect, accountability, and proportionality. And also what I would do is to reallocate the dollars that are in the police budget. I want better policing. Black and brown people want better policing. And so I would reallocate those dollars, restructure so that I could get dollars into the mental health care professionals. If 4 out of every 10 calls that go to 911 have to do with mental health care issues, I'd get the mental health care professionals involved and I would invest those dollars in the mental health care professionals. I would also invest in the community-based organizations that can help alleviate the crime, including the violence interrupters.
Okay.
I would make sure that's where the dollars went. So that's how I would address it.
Let me bring Scott Stringer into this conversation. He's often referred to, tracked, and published numbers on the financial cost of police misconduct. And I know you've been following the defund debate, which gets to much of what Ray McGuire was talking about. What's your sense of where we need to go in public safety?
Well, let me just spend 10 seconds as somebody, I think, on the Zoom call who has gone to more community precinct council meetings around the city over the last 8 years than most people combined. I could tell you that it is important for the community precinct councils to meet with the police captain. But remember, there's different views of policing in communities. And the leadership has to come from the police commissioner and the mayor, because what we've seen right now is a mayor who's lost control of the police department. And I do believe we should look at police resources and shift those resources to actual do the policing, to up the conveyance rates, to empower more senior police officers in communities. And at the same time, as Ray said, use the ability now to move to mental health and guidance counselors and valued members of communities to prevent kids from getting caught up in the criminal justice system. This is happening all over the country. And we're seeing it in Eugene, Oregon with mental health calls. We're seeing it with creative policing. And we're now lagging behind because we have a paralyzed police department. And in terms of resources, we can cut the budget and reinvest that budget in the kind of programs that keep people away from the criminal justice system. I put out $1 billion cut over 4 years. Advocates would like more, but the truth is we have to be bold in our thinking on this because change is coming. And what we saw over the summer, Errol, the batons and the pushing of young people, people of color, just protesting Black lives, and a police department out of control. It is time to have a mayor who knows management, who can be a leader that will have zero tolerance for abuse. And then I do agree that we have to have community interaction with police. But remember, there are some communities who don't share the policing values of others, and that's why you need the mayor to step in and have one unified system.
Andrew Yang, you put out a proposal to, or a pledge, frankly, to name a police commissioner who you described as a civilian. I assume that means somebody who has not been a cop, not been a uniformed cop before. Say a little more about what difference that would make.
It's very difficult to reform a culture if you are of that culture. And right now, far too many New Yorkers fear that if they encounter a police officer in the wrong circumstances, then then they're going to end up with their rights infringed on instead of protected. But to echo what Scott and Lori were saying, is that right now violent crime is rising and resolution rates are going down. Like, that is of chief concern to many, many New Yorkers. So you need to hold the police accountable, not just for potential civil rights abuses, but for catching the people that are perpetrating violent crimes in growing numbers. You also have to keep in mind the greater context, which is that empty streets with closed storefronts and 700,000 missing jobs are all driving criminality. So a lot of this is about trying to, again, speed up the recovery, because if you manage to get New York City back on its feet, then many of the streets that people are afraid to walk right now will actually become vibrant and safe again.
Okay, so Shaun, Donovan, violence up, clearance rates are down, a city on edge. What does Mayor Donovan do about it?
So, Errol, I want to agree with many of the things that have been said about true transparency and accountability. We can't have better policing in this city without knowing what officers are doing and being able to hold them accountable. One of the things that's critical to that, you talk about rebuilding trust in communities. Why is the police the only agency in city government that doesn't have a requirement to live in our communities? If there's any agency, any issue in this city where making sure folks understand the communities they're policing and can build relationships, it is there. So I would change and make sure there was a residency requirement. I also believe, I want to disagree with Andrew about this. I've seen examples across the country of leadership that has changed culture. Chuck Ramsey, the African-American police chief of Philadelphia, who was the leader of President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force, which I was part of, changed the culture there. What's needed is real leadership. We should take military equipment away from our police, the way I did when I was budget director, and hold them accountable. And we need to reduce what we're asking the police to do. We should not be asking them to patrol the hallways of our schools, to criminalize homelessness. We should focus them on guns and violent crime, the things that communities are worried about. And that way we can have safety and respect at the same time.
Okay, very good. Candidates, I thank you for that discussion. We are going to pick up the pace a little bit. Let's go to our cross-examination, as a matter of fact. We promised you each a chance to ask one of your rivals one question, and we'll take 1 minute to answer it, and that will be the end of that exchange. Let's start with you. We'll go in reverse alphabetical order. Let's start with you, Mr. Yang.
Reverse alphabetical order is my favorite, ever since I was a kid. So Scott, admire your work as comptroller. One of the things that I've been struck by is that our property tax system is highly inequitable and hasn't really been reformed since 1975. Have you examined property tax reform as a way to either reduce the inequities in our city or potentially as a source of revenue?
Andrew, good question. And fun fact about me, I'm the former chair of the Real Property Taxation Committee in Albany. And that was the committee that nobody wanted, and the rebels usually would get that committee. And when I got that committee, I inherited the $1 billion tax assessor scandal and was able, through my investigative work, to clean that system up. But along the way, I have seen the disparities in the system. It's a system of winners and losers in the 4 classes. The mayor and the city council proposed changes to the system. They had a commission. Nobody has acted on that since the onset of COVID. As mayor, I'm going to look at those recommendations, continue the work of holding hearings, building consensus. And I think part of the key to getting a more fair real property taxation system is to get away from that winner or loser mentality, to make sure that we don't overburden the poorest people in the city. We make it fair and equitable. And it's going to take a lot of political will to have those conversations. But, you know, Andrew, as someone who has spent some time, I mean, I don't talk about it a lot because people kind of gaze about it, but it is a complicated system that does require leadership. So I agree with you that this is an issue we should be talking about.
And of course, homeowners pay very strict attention to every word about this. I think the notice—
As they are right now.
I just got my notice the other day. Congratulations, your house is worth X, tax bill to follow. Maya Wiley, you can ask a question of one of the folks here on the call. Unmute, please. Yeah.
Sorry, COVID land, unmute. Andrew, I'm glad you said that you can't lead a culture change if you're of the culture. And I was shocked to hear about in a Me Too era and in an era where we had Access Hollywood, with all the progress we've made, that in your campaign, there was a culture that was very harassing and demeaning for women. And you admitted to leading that and apologized for not changing it. And yet in your campaign, and as a civil rights lawyer, I was shocked to hear that you have a non-disclosure agreement that sounds very Trumpian. Will you commit to allowing your campaign staff to complain publicly about workplace misconduct?
Thanks for the question, Maya. We've already discontinued those NDAs, which were actually for employees that were data volunteers, and they were going to see all sorts of information, but we discontinued them just to clarify for folks that we have absolutely nothing to hide. I'm on the record as saying that everything works better when you have great women leaders, like many of the people on this call tonight, leading in tandem. The organization I ran, the company I ran, had about half women leaders in marketing, HR, operations. And then the nonprofit I ran actually had majority women. And my successor as CEO was this incredible woman leader. One of my co-campaign managers is a woman of color, Sasha Ahuja. So, like, I could not agree more with the fact that you need to have women in positions of leadership in order to actually operate at the highest levels.
And you had no NDAs in any of those other positions?
Ms. Sutton, you can ask a question.
Sure. So Eric, a year ago on Martin Luther King Day, your message to Brooklynites was, if they'd come from places like Iowa and Ohio, to go home. If you were to become mayor, would your message to all New Yorkers be different? If so, how? If not, why not?
First of all, it was not to Brooklynites. It was to those throughout this city that called the police on Black men if they have a dog off a leash. It was to those that overwhelmingly call 911 on Black men just for walking down the block. It's for those who call the police because they hear noise coming from a building on Sundays that happens to be a church. It is the belief that you could displace communities instead of engaging communities. And the spirit of my whole speech, if you would have listened to, and I hope people will go back to it, because it was an entire speech of how we define crises and how we are displacing the ideas and communities of long-term residents who built this city. Not only Brooklyn, they built this city. And now that we have become a popular place, we have attempted to displace everyday New Yorkers through high property rentals, through not engaging in the local stores and businesses, not being part of New York. And so if you don't want to be part of this great diverse city of New York, that was the message I was sending to all those who feel as though they're better than the everyday New Yorker that swipes that Metro card, that puts food on our stores, and that engage in a city of diversity.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Mr. Stringer.
Let's see. Mr. McGuire, tonight, 60,000 New Yorkers, half children, are going to sleep in our homeless shelters. It's going to be another snowy night, dangerous conditions. I thought I'd give you an opportunity to talk about how we're going to move people out of shelter and change this homeless crisis that has just been so part of the discussion, but yet everyone seems paralyzed to make systemic change. And I thought I'd give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about that.
You know, it's a great question, Eric, and I mean, Scott, and thank you for asking. Listen, we have a moral and a legal responsibility for the homeless. We need funding and we need leadership and a clear strategy and accountability. We are treating people differently. Different populations have different needs. A majority of the homeless today are families with school children. We need better support there. We need to build truly affordable housing, not housing that is based on an area median income based in Westchester, but truly affordable housing. And we need to make certain that we have the wraparound services to make certain that for those people who are homeless, especially those who are suffering from mental illness, that we have the services available to them so that we can begin to address it. But first, it goes to the economic plan that I have of building truly affordable housing such that when you lose your job, or first, doesn't take 50 to 60% of your income to pay your rent. And then when you lose your job, you become homeless. So we need to be able to build and give our citizens jobs so that they don't get into the situation of being homeless. And when they find themselves homeless, let's make certain that we have transition services and that we have homes. It shouldn't be the case, Scott, that we pay $500 a night for someone to stay in a shelter when we can build to make certain that they have truly affordable houses and a room over the truly affordable homes and a roof over their head and the services that surround them to make sure that they can live with dignity. And that's how I would go about it.
Okay, Mr. McGuire, your turn to ask a question.
Yeah, I would ask Kathryn Garcia. We, through all of these forums, have talked about what's not working well in the city. If you had to identify one or two things that are working well, what would you identify?
Well, I would identify first and foremost that tonight sanitation will do an absolutely phenomenal job plowing snow. When I started there, it was all paper. You would have walked in the door, gotten into a spreader, and been given a sheet of paper to follow along. Now they all have turn-by-turn directions. That's the type of change that I made in the Department of Sanitation. Most things are not working well right now. Online school is a disaster. The rollout of the vaccine plan is a disaster. We do not have healthcare that is reaching people right now. There are so many pieces across the city where we are not getting what people need to them. And people in New York City want essential services done well. They want to be safe in their communities. They want their kids to go to school. And they definitely want sanitation to be plowing tonight. And that is the type of experience that I have and that I bring to the table. I know how to make it work. I have made it work in extremely challenging situations. Thank you.
Okay, and Ms. Garcia, your turn to ask a question.
So we haven't asked a lot of the women questions, so I'm going to ask Maya Wiley a question. We've talked a lot about equity, but what would be your specific plan for NYCHA with their $40 billion worth of need?
Yeah, thank you, Kathryn. Look, we have $40 billion worth of need. And when I talk to public housing residents, one of the primary things I hear and what I will start with is public housing has to stay public. And that is our best base of a permanently affordable housing. So it includes engaging, having a governance process where NYCHA residents have the ability to understand, have it available to them, what the money is, where it's going, and how best to spend it and prioritize it. Absolutely work with the federal government because it has not and must do more of its fair share of investing in the capital of NYCHA. But I would also say, and what we have already committed to do in New Deal New York, is $10 billion to create 100,000 jobs focused on communities of color, communities hard hit by COVID, and also having 25% unemployment rates, but to solve community problems. And we don't need anyone's permission for that $10 billion. We can do that right now. And we've committed at least $2 billion of that to actually start to bring back safety and dignity to residents, but giving them some opportunity to say what that money should be spent on.
Okay. Mr. Donovan.
Thanks, Errol. Ray, I want to go back to a conversation we had the other night on a different Brooklyn forum with Reverend Foy in the wee hours of the morning. And, I talked about having looked in the eyes of families around Brooklyn in the midst of the mortgage crisis and having seen 2/3 of Black wealth destroyed in this country by that crisis. I want to understand your thinking about what caused that, and particularly having served at an institution at City that played such a central role in the foreclosure crisis we saw, what you did as a leader there in those days of crisis.
So, Shaun Obama, one thing that you can recognize here is, and I think you know something about finance, you know that I work in investment banking for 40 some odd years, which is different to where the crisis occurred. And so I want to make certain that, and I think you know this, given the relationships and given your history here, at least how you talk about it. And so I didn't have anything to do with that, but let me tell you, as one of the leaders on Wall Street, and certainly one of the only one who looks like me for as long as I was on Wall Street, I made certain that we began to address that, becoming one of the leading lenders in truly affordable housing, making investments in the communities, making investments in summer jobs, making certain that the firm committed to folks in the neighborhood, and making certain that I continued to invest with a verifiable track record into the communities, especially those who were the hardest hit. So I have a track record, Shaun, of having invested in the communities, especially during the times of the crisis, and also making certain that the institutional priorities were focused just on these industries. So I think you look at the track record, which you know well, and look at the things, the leadership I've taken to address the communities, not only in my position as leader of the investment bank, which is separate to where the mortgage crisis took place, but also as a leader in the community, making certain that I personally invested in making certain that communities and people who are entrepreneurs in those communities were able to rise up, which is the jobs plan that I have: go big, go forward, go big, go small, go forward, to make sure that these communities get empowered. And one thing I would say, it is now so often the case that we satisfy ourselves because Black and brown people have been outside for so long that we satisfy ourselves that giving them crumbs is going to be sufficient and they feel full. I'm not interested in the crumbs.
Okay.
Matter of fact, I'm not interested in the cake. I'm interested in us owning the bakery so that we can get from the lower class to the middle class and have the home ownerships. And I've been so invested in that, and I'm quite proud of that. So thank you for asking the question.
Very good. Last but not least, Mr. Adams.
Ray, that was funny in the beginning. My question is, Shaun, I've heard you talk about several areas around education, and as I seem sometimes to be alone in this space, when a child is in their mother's womb, 4 weeks they have 10,000 brain cells. At 24 weeks they have 10 billion. Everyone talks about 0 to 3. Are we ignoring the science of prenatal how important that is. What are your thoughts around prenatal? I don't hear anyone talking about this but me.
So, Eric, you've been eloquent on this subject, and we've been on a lot of these forums together now. I think you've heard that one of the most profound experiences for me was the ability, when we had both our boys, to work with a midwife who has become part of our family. For me, there is much more we need to be doing. And I agree with you so much of what you said about this, that we need to be investing at that critical time of life. One of the things that I've found in the work that I've done here in the city and across the country is that we miss so many opportunities to work more effectively with women before they give birth, to make sure that we have all of the healthcare, all of the nutritional needs. Just give you one example. When we were implementing the most aggressive lead paint law in the country under when I was housing commissioner, I worked very closely with the health commissioner, Tom Frieden. And what we found is that we were missing so many opportunities. Every time one of my inspectors was in an apartment, if there was a woman who was pregnant, we wanted to carry and give to her information about the nurse-family partnership and vice versa. We needed to be doing much more to break down the silos across government and work much more effectively to reach. We touch people in the city over and over again, and we need a mayor and a government that works to connect those services much better than we do today.
Okay, thank you, candidates. Kind of coming down the home stretch here. There are a million other questions that I'd love to ask you, but I want to end on something that is a big issue in Brooklyn and around the city as well, of course, which is when we come to affordable housing, the immediate question is affordable for who, right? The usual metric is area median income, which in turn leads to an additional fight. Are we talking about New York metropolitan area? Are we talking about the 5 boroughs? Are we talking about the county? Are we talking about the community board? Are we talking about, plus or minus a quarter mile of the development site in question? I would like each of you to just take a real 60 seconds, Eric Adams, a real 60 seconds. What's your thinking on that? We have in Brooklyn what I would call a sort of a broad consensus. The broad consensus is that if it's not pitched to the people who live right there within 100 feet of the development zone, it's a problem. Are you willing to fight against that consensus? Do you have a different way of conceptualizing the whole thing? Let's start with you, Ms. Wiley.
Look, we have an administration that did bean counting rather than problem solving when it came to affordability. And we have the opportunity to actually reach all the folks who need affordable housing by having a long-term planning process that engages community in that long-term plan, setting principles so that we're developing in communities appropriately, but the ways that we meet affordable housing needs, and every single neighborhood needs affordable housing. And that has to be one of the principles. That also means changing how we're doing zonings so that we're reforming the system so that it's principled, responsive, and has some voice, but the decisions have to be guided by the principles themselves, and that should include an equity impact assessment.
Okay, Shaun Donovan, you've been in this for decades.
I have, and look, there is no question that we need to reach deeper affordability. The problem is most people go directly to AMI, and if you change it in the wrong way, what that would mean is that the more than 100,000 New York families that depend on Section 8 vouchers would be dramatically restricted in where they could move with those vouchers. And so we need to attack this in the right way, not just by saying AMI is wrong, because if you change AMI overall, you're actually going to hurt hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers. What I believe is that we need to have a plan that gets to more deeply affordable housing. And the only way to do that, we know that it costs more than $500 a month to run an apartment in New York, whether you're a nonprofit, the city, or a for-profit owner. We need more Section 8. We need more operating assistance so that the very lowest income people, think about it, $500 a month for a family if it's 30% of their income, is going to be more over $12,000. If you're making $10,000 a year, you're never going to be able to afford it. So that's a piece of it. The second is home ownership. I started 25 years ago with Reverend Youngblood creating Nehemiah housing in Brooklyn. And what we showed is that you could move directly out of public housing, buy your first home, and be able to build wealth in a way that fundamentally changed the equation of gentrification and displacement. That's something we need to be investing in as well.
Okay, Scott Stringer.
Look, when Bloomberg was mayor and Shaun was at his side, it was all about building as many units of so-called affordable housing. De Blasio becomes mayor, Maya knows this, he wanted to double Bloomberg. So it was this whole fight about how much affordable housing can we build. I have a different approach. I think we should look at the hundreds of vacant lots, 566 in Brooklyn. Instead of giving the big real estate guns the land, let's invest in community-based organizations. Let's give the subsidies to get that AMI that is affordable in our communities. Part of what I want to do is repurpose 421A. That's a giveaway to the wealthiest developers. Let's purpose that subsidy to actually build the housing that we need. Mayor LaGuardia built public housing. He went to Washington, cried to Roosevelt, we got public housing. Then we built the Mitchell-Amo housing program. Koch gave abandoned buildings back to the people. We can no longer think that luxury developers are going to build affordable housing. One, they're all REITs. They can't get, it's not a business plan that works for them. So we have all of these great community-based organizations. Let's take our vacant city-owned property. Let's pass a land bank plan in the city council. And then let's start integrating neighborhoods and not rely on as-of-right zoning. Let's talk about integration and affordability in all our communities. De Blasio only rezoned the communities of color and pushed people out. But there's been no rezoning on the Upper West Side or the Upper East Side. I would fundamentally change this housing, radically change this housing program.
Ray McGuire, this is what in academic circles is often referred to as market failure, right? We just have a market that is not providing an essential good, and that's where government steps in. What do you do about affordable housing?
So let's go through some of the facts first. When we're building, we used to build 2.2 units of housing for every new job in the city. Now we build 0.5. The housing demand has so outpaced the supply that it's gotten too expensive. If you look at even before COVID, more than half of low income between $15,000 and $30,000 were paying at least 50% of their income in rent. So what do we need to do? We do need to restructure with the federal government's help, AMI, and we do need to make certain that we can build. And this is the most expensive city in which to build. It is also the most archaic when it comes to permitting, when it comes to all the things that you need to get in order to get a place built. And it also comes down to how houses are built, sustainability. We're way off the market. And you're right, there's a market failure. So what do you need to do? First, as you're building affordable housing, you need to bring the price down. You need to include the community, which has not been done before, at least not done adequately in any time in recent history. So those who are most at risk and those who are potentially displaced get a say-so in what takes place in their communities. And so we have to start with the community and we have to build from there. We need to make certain that we don't incentivize and subsidize those people who are paying $2,000 to $3,000 where we're subsidizing. That's not the community. So we need to restructure the entire system.
Eric Adams, as borough president, you were involved with the community boards who fought this out at the ground level for most of the last decade. What is your take on where affordability needs to be set, and how would you do that as mayor?
Well, first of all, we need to, preservation is crucial. We need to preserve what we have, particularly in NYCHA. I would sell the air rights over NYCHA, which would give us $8 billion that we can go into repair NYCHA. We focus on a lot of development. I agree with Scott. We did far too much development in poorer communities where we upzone. The housing crisis is a citywide crisis. We need to do building in those areas that have quality schools, great transportation. And then we need to look at United Way's report. 40% of New Yorkers had a sufficiency deficit, and I believe it was 2019. When we talk about housing, we have to stop ignoring the middle class. that teacher, an accountant. We want them here in the city. So we need to ensure we have low income and middle income. And I think Shaun was right. They did an amazing job in places like East New York, where they did the Nehemiah housing. We have to get back into the Nehemiah housing and back into having low condominiums as well.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Garcia.
Thank you. I think it's critically important that we are putting affordable housing across the city. When you think back to some of the criticisms of NYCHA is that you are putting poor people all together, and that having communities that have the butcher, the financier, and the teacher all able to live there is critical. But you're right, many of us on this panel, we can't chase a unit number. We have to accept the fact that if we're going to build deeply affordable housing, we're going to build fewer units. And I have put forward a plan that talks about building 50,000 deeply affordable units. So we're not making affordable housing that's going to cost you $3,500 a month, which isn't really affordable to anyone. But we also have an opportunity right now with the challenges that the hotel sector is facing, as well as the office building sector, to rapidly convert those into housing for people and not let those assets just sit there empty. We need to streamline our ability to get affordable housing into the ground and prioritize it over other development projects, because those are homes. Those are the future homes for people. I have been part of putting plans like that into place to ensure that we actually hit our goals. And I know that as mayor, I would be able to achieve that.
Okay, thanks very much. Lori Sutton, tell us about affordable housing.
All right. Well, affordability is at the very heart of New York City's new value proposition. And of course, housing is at the heart of affordability. So here's how I see it. I see that this is a time when, as Kathryn said, with crisis comes opportunity. So all of the things that have been said in terms of the zoning, the community engagement early and often, the different types of excess commercial conversion, hotel conversion. Yes, there's state and local programs for converting thousands of units into single room occupancy units, which have been very, very, very popular in the past with homeless individuals, particularly single men. I think there are things that we can do that we just need to stretch ourselves to recognize that the pandemic, while it's been devastating, it has not brought every problem to our doorstep. We were 48 out of 50 states in terms of being least business friendly. We are still that way. In terms of social and upward mobility, we are at the very bottom with the rest of the blue progressive governed cities across the country. We have to really ask ourselves, what are we doing that can help, particularly our brown and black communities that have been so left out for so long, to live the lives with affordability, with respect, with dignity that they deserve. As mayor, I would do that.
Okay. Andrew Yang, tell us about affordable housing.
Thank you, Errol. Thank you, Brooklyn. I mean, there are two very large related problems. Number one, affordable housing isn't affordable for a lot of people. And number two, everyone is for affordable housing in the abstract until it's pitched for their neighborhood, and then they're less for it. And that's been the reality in New York for a long time. But Kathryn referenced some of the big opportunities we have right now. There's a hotel operator who just turned in their keys to their lender the other week because they have no business and they have mounting costs, and they said, I give up. So there are many of these hotel operators that, in my view, should be turning those keys into the city because that's going to speed up our ability to develop properties. You don't need to build, you just need to repurpose some of these hotel properties. And the brutal truth is that some of this is going to happen with some of the commercial properties as well. Midtown Manhattan right now is 82% unoccupied. And even if we successfully get the city back on its feet, a lot of organizations are going to operate somewhat differently. They're not going to necessarily have everyone in 5 days a week. There's going to be this balance of remote and in person, though I'm going to just mention right now that New York City needs people to come to the office. Like, this is a place-based economy, and we need to make that safe, but we also should recognize that things are not going to come back to the way they were. So that is, to me, the mammoth opportunity, is that we have many unused spaces that need to be repurposed, as well as trying to build in some of the city-owned lots.
Okay. Folks, that brings us to the end of our time. We've got, of course, a lot more to talk about in other venues in the future, and I look forward to doing that with each of you. But for now, we're going to say goodnight, and I want to remind everyone watching, one purpose of this was to allow the Brooklyn Democratic Organization and the district leaders who are in charge of it to kind of check the candidates out up close and figure out who they might want to carry petitions for, because petitions will be hitting the streets in just a few weeks. We're going to wish you all the best of luck. We'll see you out on the campaign trail, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Errol. Thank you, Rodney.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much. Thank
Let's
you.
go Nets.
Yeah, let's go. I also just want to thank everyone for participating on Brooklyn's first debate. This is one of the largest Democratic county in the nation, and I just want to thank all the candidates for participating. Thank you, our moderator, Brooklyn's finance, Errol Lewis, and our debate planning team. Thank you for tuning in on this no NFL Sunday to hear the candidates. Again, my name is Assemblymember Rodney Short Hermlin, Brooklyn Democratic Party Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rodney. You're a pro. You need to get on TV like Errol. You can elbow him out. Very natural.
Well, I can never get Errol voted out.
Bye, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Great night.
See you guys.
All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Brooklyn Democratic Party mayoral debate. And more importantly than any of that's going on, or I don't know if it's more important, but very importantly, if I can bring it up on the screen, at yangfornewyork.com, if we go to the Andrew Yang for New York campaign website here, they are currently trying to raise $200,000 by January 31st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you aren't aware, that is in less than 3 hours. And currently we have raised just about $151,942. So if media smear hit pieces annoy you, or if you're just see, I don't know if you guys are like me, I tend to rage donate. So I donate when I get angry. So the more I get it's pretty simple. The more you make me rage, the more I donate. So if you're like me and that's what motivates you, or if you're of a healthier mindset and you donate just because you really support Andrew Yang and want to see his vision for New York City come true and help New York City become the city of the world again. Not that it isn't, but got to recover from coronavirus. Make sure you donate right now at yang4ny.com. And other than that, make sure you leave a like and subscribe. And yeah, that's going to be the end of the debate. So see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.